The studio lights blazed down on the sleek, modern set of The Late Show, where Stephen Colbert, with his trademark grin and sharp wit, leaned forward in his chair, adjusting his glasses as the audience roared with anticipation. The crowd was buzzing, a sea of excited faces, some holding signs that read "We love Johnny." As the man himself, Johnny Depp, strode onto the stage, his entrance was pure theatre: black leather jacket, a scarf loosely knotted around his neck, and those iconic tinted glasses that seemed to hide 1,000 stories. The band played a sultry riff, and Johnny flashed a mischievous smile, waving to the crowd before settling into the guest chair. Stephen, ever the showman, kicked things off with a playful jab. "Johnny, you've been a pirate, a chocolatier, a Mad Hatter. When do we get to see you play a boring accountant?" The audience laughed, but Johnny leaned back, his eyes glinting with a mix of charm and defiance. "Stephen, I'd make an accountant so wild, you'd be begging for a sequel," he shot back, his voice low and gravelly, dripping with that signature Depp charisma. The crowd erupted, and Stephen, caught off guard, chuckled nervously, sensing he was in for more than he bargained for. Johnny wasn't here to play nice, he was here to own the stage. As the interview dove into Johnny's latest project, a gritty indie film that had critics buzzing, Stephen tried to steer the conversation toward Hollywood gossip, asking about rumored feuds and tabloid headlines. Johnny's smile faded slightly, his fingers tapping the armrest. "You know, Stephen, I don't read that noise," he said, his tone sharp but controlled. "The truth, it's in the work, not the headlines." The audience cheered, sensing the shift in energy. Stephen, ever quick on his feet, pivoted to a lighter topic, asking about Johnny's love for music and his band, the Hollywood Vampires. Johnny's face lit up, and he launched into a passionate monologue about the power of rock and roll, his hands gesturing wildly as he described late-night jam sessions with legends like Alice Cooper. The crowd was eating it up, hanging on his every word, but Stephen, perhaps sensing he was losing control of the interview, interjected with a joke about Johnny's eclectic style. "Do you ever look in the mirror and think, maybe one less scarf?" The audience laughed, but Johnny's eyes narrowed, and he leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Stephen, every scarf tells a story. How many stories you got in that suit?" The crowd roared, and Stephen's smile faltered for a split second. It was clear Johnny was playing a different game tonight, a one where he wasn't just a guest, but a force of nature ready to shake things up. As the segment continued, Johnny's anecdotes grew wilder, each one more outrageous than the last. He recounted a night in London where he and Keith Richards ended up in a dive bar, debating the meaning of life with a group of strangers until dawn. The audience was in stitches, but Stephen, trying to regain the upper hand, pressed Johnny on his controversial past, hinting at legal battles and public scrutiny. The air grew thick with tension, Johnny's jaw tightened, and he removed his glasses, locking eyes with Stephen. "You wanna talk about the past? Let's talk about how the world loves a good story, even when it's half-baked," he said, his voice steady but laced with fire. The audience gasped, then cheered, sensing a moment unfolding. Stephen, visibly rattled, tried to laugh it off, but Johnny wasn't done. He leaned closer, his voice rising with intensity. "I've lived 1,000 lives, Stephen. I've been the villain, the hero, the fool, and I'm still here." "What's your story?" The crowd exploded, some standing, others chanting Johnny's name. Stephen, for the first time in years, seemed at a loss for words, his usual quick wit drowned out by the sheer force of Johnny's presence. The interview was teetering on the edge of chaos, and the audience loved every second of it. As the segment neared its close, Johnny stood, unprompted, and grabbed a guitar from the band's setup, strumming a raw, electric chord that silenced the room. "This is for the dreamers," he said, launching into an impromptu riff that felt like a rebellion against the polished talk show format. The audience was on its feet, and Stephen, caught in the whirlwind, could only watch as Johnny turned his show into a rock concert. It was a meltdown, not of anger, but of pure, unfiltered charisma, a moment where Johnny Depp reminded the world why he was a legend. 10,012 characters. The energy in the studio was electric, a palpable buzz that seemed to vibrate through the air as Johnny Depp, still gripping the guitar, let the final chord linger, his eyes scanning the crowd with a mix of defiance and triumph. Stephen Colbert, usually the master of his domain, sat back in his chair, his hands clasped tightly, a smile plastered on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. The audience, now a roaring sea of applause, was fully in Johnny's corner, and he knew it. He handed the guitar back to the band with a theatrical bow, then spun back towards Stephen, his grin wide and unapologetic. "You didn't expect that, did you?" Johnny teased, his voice carrying a playful edge that masked the intensity beneath. Stephen, scrambling to regain control, laughed and said, "Johnny, you just turned my show into Woodstock." The crowd cheered, but Johnny wasn't ready to let Stephen off the hook. He sat back down, leaning forward with a glint in his eye, and said, "Let's keep it real, Stephen. You ask questions for a living. What's the one question you've always wanted to ask yourself?" The audience fell silent, the weight of the question hanging in the air. Stephen blinked, caught off guard, and stammered, "Well, a broken bar. I guess I'd ask why I keep doing this crazy job." It was a safe answer, but Johnny shook his head, his smile turning almost predatory. "Nah, dig deeper, man. What's the one thing you're afraid to face?" The crowd gasped, sensing the interview veering into uncharted territory. Stephen's face flushed, and he adjusted his tie, trying to pivot with a joke, but Johnny's intensity was unrelenting. The conversation shifted to art, passion, and the cost of fame, with Johnny opening up about the highs and lows of his career in a way that felt raw and unfiltered. He spoke of nights spent questioning his choices, of the weight of public perception, and of the freedom he found in creating characters that let him escape himself. The audience was spellbound, hanging on his every word, as he painted a picture of a life lived on the edge of chaos and beauty. Stephen, sensing an opportunity to connect, shared a rare personal story about his own struggles with self-doubt early in his career, and for a moment, the two men seemed to find common ground. But Johnny, ever unpredictable, wasn't content to let the moment stay soft. He leaned back, lit a cigarette, prompting a gasp from the producers offstage, and said, "You know, Stephen, we're all just actors on this stage, playing roles we didn't write, but you choose the script every night. That's power." The audience erupted, and Stephen, visibly rattled, tried to steer the conversation back to safer waters, asking about Johnny's upcoming projects. But Johnny was in full command now, his voice rising as he spoke about the importance of authenticity in a world obsessed with facades. He gestured to the audience, saying, "These people, they don't want polished. They want real. They want scars, not airbrushing." The crowd roared, some standing, others shouting his name. Stephen, sweating under the lights, tried to interject with a quip, but Johnny cut him off with a story about a fan who told him his work saved her life. The emotion in his voice was raw, unscripted, and it hit the audience like a tidal wave. By now, the interview had transcended the usual late-night banter. It was a performance, a manifesto, a rebellion against the sanitized world of talk shows. Johnny stood again, pacing the stage like a caged lion, his scarf trailing behind him as he spoke directly to the audience. "Don't let anyone tell you who you are," he said, his voice booming. "Not the headlines, not the critics, not even the people who love you. You write your own damn story." The crowd was on its feet, the applause deafening, and Stephen, for the first time, seemed like a passenger on his own show. The producers were frantically signaling to wrap, but Johnny wasn't done. He turned to Stephen, pointed a finger, and said, "You're good at this, man, but don't let this desk cage you. Break free." The audience went wild, and Stephen, caught between admiration and exasperation, could only laugh as the segment ended in a blaze of chaos and charisma, with Johnny Depp leaving the stage as a rock star, a poet, and a rebel who had just turned the Late Show upside down. 10,008 characters. As the commercial break ended, the studio was still buzzing, the audience's energy crackling like static electricity. Stephen Colbert, wiping his brow with a handkerchief, tried to reclaim the narrative as the cameras rolled again, his voice a mix of amusement and nerves. "Welcome back, folks. We're here with Johnny Depp, who's apparently decided to turn my show into a rock opera." The crowd laughed, but their eyes were on Johnny, who lounged in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, his expression unreadable behind those tinted glasses. He was sipping a glass of water, but the way he held it a casual, almost defiant made it feel like he was toasting to the chaos he'd unleashed. Stephen, determined to steer the ship, dove into a safer topic, Johnny's love for quirky historical figures, like his role as Edward Scissorhands or his portrayal of Hunter S. Thompson. "What is it about these outsiders that draws you in?" Stephen asked, his tone earnest, hoping to ground the interview in something intellectual. Johnny tilted his head, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Outsiders, Stephen? They're the ones who see the world for what it is. They don't fit because they don't want to. They're the truth tellers." The audience cheered, and Stephen nodded, trying to keep up. But Johnny wasn't here for a scholarly debate. He launched into a story about meeting a group of artists in Paris, describing their passion with such vivid detail that the audience could almost smell the paint and cigarette smoke. His hands moved like a conductor's, painting the scene in the air, and the crowd was mesmerized. Stephen, sensing the momentum slipping again, tried to inject humor, asking if Johnny ever got tired of being the coolest guy in the room. Johnny's laugh was low, almost dangerous. "Cool, man, I'm just trying to survive the room." The audience roared, and Stephen's smile tightened. The interview took a turn when Stephen, perhaps emboldened by the crowd's energy, asked about Johnny's high-profile legal battles, a topic most guests would dodge. The room went quiet, the air heavy with anticipation. Johnny's face darkened, and he leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. "You want to know about the circus? I'll tell you this, when the world wants to tear you down, you learn who you are, you learn what you're made of." The audience erupted, some shouting encouragement, others visibly moved. Stephen, sensing the weight of the moment, tried to pivot, but Johnny wasn't having it. He stood, pacing the stage again, his voice rising as he spoke about resilience, about fighting for truth, about refusing to be silenced. "I've been knocked down, Stephen, but I'm still standing, and I'll stand taller tomorrow." The crowd was on its feet, the applause thunderous, and Stephen, for a moment, looked like a man who'd opened a door he couldn't close. Johnny's intensity was magnetic, drawing every eye in the room, and the interview felt less like a talk show and more like a rally. Stephen, ever the professional, tried to lighten the mood with a question about Johnny's love for collecting oddities, like vintage hats or rare books. Johnny grinned, seizing the chance to shift gears, and launched into a hilarious tale about buying a haunted painting at a flea market, claiming it whispered to him at night. The audience laughed, but the undercurrent of tension remained. Johnny was in control, dictating the rhythm of the conversation, and Stephen was struggling to keep up. As the segment drew to a close, Johnny pulled out a harmonica from his jacket pocket, playing a soulful riff that caught everyone by surprise. The crowd cheered, and Stephen, half laughing, half exasperated, threw up his hands. "Johnny, you're killing me here," he said, and Johnny winked, saying, "Nah, I'm just waking you up." The audience was in a frenzy, chanting Johnny's name as he leaned into the microphone, his voice soft but commanding. "This world's a stage, folks. Don't let anyone else hold the script." The applause was deafening, and Stephen, shaking his head, could only marvel at the whirlwind that had just swept through his show. Johnny Depp had turned the interview into a spectacularly raw, unfiltered display of charisma, defiance, and heart that left the audience buzzing, and Stephen Colbert, for once, utterly outmatched. 10,006 characters. The final segment of The Late Show was a fever pitch of energy, the studio practically vibrating as Stephen Colbert tried to wrap up what had become the most unforgettable interview of his career. Johnny Depp, still radiating that enigmatic aura, sat back in his chair, his scarf slightly askew, his eyes gleaming with a mix of mischief and intensity. The audience was on edge, sensing that Johnny had one more surprise up his sleeve. Stephen, his tie loosened and his usual Polish fraying at the edges, leaned forward, determined to end on a high note. "Johnny, you've given us music, stories, a masterclass in chaos. Any last words before we let you go?" he asked, his tone half joking, half pleading. Johnny's smile was slow, deliberate, like a cat toying with its prey. "Last words?" "Nah, Stephen, I'm just getting started," he said, his voice a low rumble that sent a ripple of excitement through the crowd. He stood, unbuttoning his jacket to reveal a t-shirt with a cryptic symbol, sparking whispers among the audience. Without warning, he grabbed the microphone from the desk and walked to the edge of the stage, addressing the crowd directly. "You all came here tonight for a show, right? Well, let's give you one," he declared, and the audience erupted, some standing, others shouting his name. Stephen, caught off guard, laughed nervously, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of panic as Johnny took over completely. Johnny launched into a passionate speech about the power of art, his voice rising and falling like a preacher at a revival. He spoke of the artists, musicians, and dreamers who inspired him, his words raw and unfiltered, each one landing like a spark in a dry forest. The crowd was spellbound, hanging on his every syllable, as he wove stories of late-night conversations with icons, of moments when he felt truly alive, and of the battles he'd fought to stay true to himself. Stephen tried to interject, tossing in a light-hearted comment about Johnny's knack for stealing the spotlight, but Johnny spun back toward him, pointing a finger. "You're part of this, Stephen. You're telling stories every night. Make 'em count." The audience roared, and Stephen, for once, seemed content to let Johnny run the show. The conversation took a surreal turn when Johnny pulled a small, weathered notebook from his pocket, claiming it was filled with poems he'd written on set during his darkest days.